Hi, I'm Bridget. Welcome to my kitchen. Are you looking for a quick, healthy weeknight meal idea that just happens to be vegetarian? Today, I'll share a vegetarian chickpea stew recipe that's been a staple in our house for years. It's family friendly and simple. Let me show you. Chickpeas are such an easy bean to cook with. They're palatable to most and can be tossed into all sorts of dishes. Now this recipe has a big list of ingredients, but most are pantry staples and those that aren't are optional. We'll start by chopping one onion and we'll get that sauteing with a couple of cloves of garlic. I'm chopping this in chunks because I want it to give a little bit of texture to the stew. I'm just going to warm the pot over medium and I'll add a couple of tablespoons of olive oil. The oil has warmed, so I will add the onions. And then I'm going to add 2 cloves of garlic that have been pressed, or you could just chop them finely. You could also use just a jar of chopped garlic. And while we're at it, I'll add a bay leaf and just a little bit of crushed red pepper. Just a pinch, really. Not even quite 1/8 of a teaspoon. We'll let these onions cook until they soften. And in the meantime, I'm going to chop 2 sweet peppers. I'm using fresh peppers today, but you could just as easily use a jar of roasted red peppers if you'd like. And I'm just going to chop these into bite-sized pieces. These peppers will cook quickly, and once they've softened, then we'll add the remaining ingredients and let everything simmer away. I like to keep this stew fairly chunky, so there's lots of extra texture to go along with the chickpeas. The onions are sizzling away. I'm just going to toss these in on top. The garlic has browned and is sticking to the bottom of the pot, but as soon as the moisture from the peppers is released, that garlic is going to come right up into our mixture. The peppers are starting to get soft, so I am going to add the spices. Now I'm using lots of paprika in this dish. It gives it a bit of a Spanish kind of flavor. So 1.5 teaspoons of paprika. And then just 1/4 teaspoon of smoked paprika. It gives such a beautiful smoky flavor. To that, I will add just 1/4 teaspoon of ginger and 1/2 teaspoon of cumin. For this basic recipe, I've used all different kinds of spice blends. Sometimes I've used East Indian spices. For years, I made this recipe with Moroccan spices. So when you think of these basic ingredients, the chickpeas, the peppers, and then the other ingredients that I'm going to add, the tomatoes and broth, really you can take the flavors in any direction you want. But I do love this Spanish-inspired version. Now I'm going to add just 1/4 cup of a dry red wine. You could use white wine if that's what you happen to have open. And when it's mostly evaporated, then I will add the final few ingredients. Next, I'll add 1 cup of crushed tomatoes. And then about 1.5 cups of vegetable stock. I'm going to reserve another 1/2 cup just in case when the stew is getting close to serving time, if I want to thin it a little bit. And I will add 3 cups of chickpeas. Now for this recipe, I use chickpeas that I have soaked from dried and cooked. It's my preferred way to use chickpeas, both because the flavor is better, I think, than canned chickpeas, and I like the texture. But canned chickpeas are just fine in this recipe. So you would need about 1.5 cans of chickpeas for this recipe. I'm going to add just a tiny pinch of saffron to this recipe, just to add a little bit of exotic flavor. And then we'll bring it to a simmer and let it bubble away while we make an herb pesto that we're going to serve along with this. The herb sauce that we're making is a bit like a pesto, but it won't be as smooth because I'm going to chop the herbs by hand. We'll be using about 1/2 cup of chopped parsley and 1/2 cup of chopped cilantro. Now you could make this sauce in a food processor if you'd like. Just be careful not to let it get to a paste. When I serve the stew, I'm going to put a spoonful of this sauce on top, but you can use it in all sorts of ways. It's delicious put on fish before you bake it. And don't worry if you have more of one herb than the other. This sauce will last in the fridge for just a few days, but you could also freeze it. There, we've got just the right amount of cilantro. I'll just mix these herbs together, and then I'm going to add just a pinch of sea salt and a teaspoon of paprika and 1/2 teaspoon of cumin, and then a pinch of, well, you can use cayenne or any kind of hot pepper. Really, if you want more of a pinch, it's up to you, depends on your preference for heat. So that's it for the dry ingredients. Now I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. And then 3 tablespoons of olive oil. And we'll just mix this together. And because I have it, I'm going to add 1 more tiny pinch of saffron, like really just 3 or 5 strands. So we'll set our sauce aside and see how the stew is doing. The peppers are tender. They can do with a few more minutes of cooking. I'm just going to do a taste test here because I haven't even added any salt yet. So there's lots of spice flavor, but definitely needs salt. So I'm going to add a teaspoon. And get that mixed in. And then I'm going to add about half a tablespoon of molasses. It's a flavor enhancer I often use when I'm cooking with tomatoes because it just cuts their acidity a little bit. I guess that was more like a tablespoon. And molasses pairs really nicely with paprika. I'm going to turn that up a little bit more. And I'll taste it again. That's a great amount of salt, and the molasses adds a nice flavor on its own also. This stew is delicious served over couscous or rice, or it can be served on its own. And we'll add a nice dollop of our herb sauce. And it's ready to serve. This Spanish-inspired chickpea stew makes a delicious weeknight meal, and it shows that vegetarian meals can be hearty and flavorful. Thanks for watching. Thank you.